5 weeks into the United States military engagement against Iran, an F-15E Strike Eagle was brought down over Iranian soil. Defense analysts estimate that more than $2 billion worth of American aircraft has been lost since hostilities began. Fuel prices across the country have surged by 37%. NATO partners have sealed their airspace, withdrawn access to their military installations, and effectively turned their backs on Washington. Then, on the 1st of April, President Donald Trump addressed the nation and declared that the conflict was approaching its end, claiming the United States had thoroughly and completely overwhelmed Iran. Within hours of that statement, Iranian forces launched another wave of missile strikes targeting Israeli positions and Gulf energy infrastructure. When pressed on the contradiction, Trump's response was blunt and unapologetic. He called it war and moved on. The uncomfortable truth is that America is not winning this conflict, but neither is Iran. Tehran's economy is being strangled. Its critical infrastructure absorbs strikes on a daily basis. There is no victor on either side of this battlefield in any conventional sense. Yet there is one country that is winning and winning decisively. It has not deployed a single soldier. It has not fired a single weapon. It has not spent a single dollar of its own treasury. That country is China. Beijing is extracting live battlefield intelligence from every American combat mission flown over the Persian Gulf. It is locking in energy agreements that would have been completely out of reach just 6 months ago. It is drawing America's own treaty allies steadily into its diplomatic and economic orbit. None of this is happening. In spite of this war, all of it is happening because of it. To understand how, you have to start with the technology. During the 12-day Israeli-Iranian conflict in June of the previous year, Israel successfully disrupted Iranian drone operations by interfering with GPS navigation signals. That approach worked then. It does not work today. Iranian missiles are now striking within 5 meters of designated targets. The reason is Baidu 3, China's independently developed satellite navigation network, which has fully replaced American GPS as the core guidance infrastructure behind Iran's entire precision strike capability. A counselor at the Chinese embassy in Tehran publicly confirmed this transition. Defense analysts have described the encrypted military-grade Baidu signal as effectively resistant to jamming. China did not build Baidu out of ambition alone. It built it out of necessity. During the 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis, American interference with GPS signals caused Chinese ballistic missiles to go off course. That humiliation cost Beijing nothing in lives but everything in strategic confidence. The response was a 30-year infrastructure investment that is now being validated in real combat against the very country that forced its creation. Baidu also carries a short-burst communication function that allows military commanders to redirect drones or missiles while still airborne, across distances of up to 2,000 kilometers. If an American Patriot battery or an F-15 is detected in the flight path, a Chinese satellite transmits a compact instruction packet and the incoming drone immediately executes pre-loaded evasion sequences. This is not a theoretical capability being discussed in research papers. It is functioning operationally over the Persian Gulf right now. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth acknowledged publicly that the United States had underestimated the operational effectiveness of Iranian drones. He did not elaborate on who had made those drones effective. The answer is Beijing, and the intelligence flowing back to Chinese military planners as a result is of extraordinary value. Every American interception attempt is being logged. Every radar emission from an F-35 is being cataloged. Every response time from a carrier strike group is being measured. Every gap in American electronic warfare coverage is being mapped. China is studying American military performance in real time, recording every detail for the scenario it is actually preparing for, not Iran, Taiwan. The strategic architecture enabling all of this was not assembled overnight. The 25-year comprehensive strategic partnership that China signed with Iran back in 2021 laid the entire foundation. It included $5 billion in military technology transfers, rocket fuel precursors, advanced radar platforms, semiconductor-based targeting sensors, and eventually the satellite navigation backbone now powering Iran's precision warfare capability. Every component was in place before the first bomb fell. China did not react to this war, it had already prepared for it. And while American pilots fly missions over the Gulf, Chinese analysts sit in quiet rooms and learn everything they need to know about how to defeat the most advanced military on Earth. China has supplied Iran with the IC-8B anti-stealth radar system, a UHF-band platform that operates on low-frequency wavelengths specifically engineered to degrade the effectiveness of radar-absorbing coatings on the F-35 and the B-21 Raider. These are the most expensive and technologically advanced aircraft the United States has ever constructed. They were designed from the ground up with a single core purpose: to be invisible to enemy radar. Against the IC-8B, that invisibility is significantly compromised. At least one F-35 has sustained combat-related damage during this conflict, forcing an emergency landing. Analysts who spoke to regional defense publications suggested the damage pattern pointed toward an adapted air-to-air missile rather than a conventional surface-to-air system, indicating that Iranian forces may have found a method to exploit the aircraft's thermal signature rather than its radar cross-section. If that assessment holds up under scrutiny, it would represent the first recorded instance of combat damage to an F-35 in the entire history of the aircraft across any conflict anywhere in the world, and the radar system that likely enabled the detection in the first place was designed and manufactured in China. Beyond radar, China is providing Iran with continuous overhead intelligence through a constellation of more than 500 satellites delivering round-the-clock signals, intelligence, and precision terrain mapping across the entire Persian Gulf region. A former senior CIA officer once observed that in modern warfare, accurate coordinates are frequently more decisive than firepower. China is providing Iran with those coordinates continuously, around every hour of every day this conflict runs. The weapons dimension is escalating further. Iran is reportedly close to finalizing the acquisition of 50 CM-302 supersonic anti-ship missiles, the export configuration of China's YJ-12 platform. These missiles travel at 3 times the speed of sound and fly at sea-skimming altitudes that compress a naval vessel's available response window down to a matter of seconds. Military planners refer to this class of weapon as carrier killers. The USS Abraham Lincoln is currently operating within the 290-kilometer engagement range of these missiles. That is not a comfortable margin. Now consider what this war is doing to America's actual warfighting reserves. In just 5 weeks of operations, the United States has burned through approximately 40% of its combined Patriot and THAAD interceptor missile stockpiles. Roughly a quarter of the entire THAAD interceptor inventory has been consumed rebuilding. Those stockpiles to pre-war levels will take somewhere between 4 and 5 years under current production rates. That timeline alone should alarm every defense strategist focused on the Pacific theater. But the detail that carries the most serious long-term consequences is this: the Pentagon has been transferring interceptor missiles from Indo-Pacific deployments to the Middle East in order to sustain operations. That means the layered missile defense architecture protecting Japan, South Korea, Guam, and Taiwan from potential Chinese military action is being systematically drawn down to fund a war in the Gulf. The shield that was positioned to deter Chinese aggression in the one theater where China actually intends to project power is being quietly hollowed out. And Beijing is watching every transfer, counting every depleted battery, and calculating exactly what that means for the balance of power closer to home. The cost mathematics of this conflict deserve particular attention. Intercepting an Iranian drone costs the United States military approximately 200 times more than the drone itself costs to produce and launch. That ratio, sustained over weeks and potentially months of continuous operations, represents a financial and logistical drain that no military on Earth can absorb indefinitely. China understands this arithmetic better than anyone, because China helped design the equation. The Chinese People's Liberation Army published 5 formal strategic lessons drawn from this conflict on its official platforms, presented in both Chinese and English. The list reads like a comprehensive checklist for defeating American military power. Stealth aircraft radar signatures under real combat conditions, American interceptor. Depletion rates and resupply timelines. Logistics chain vulnerabilities under sustained pressure. Electronic warfare countermeasures and their limitations. Carrier strike group response times. How long it takes to reload a Patriot battery once it runs dry. Which forward operating bases are most exposed to coordinated drone swarm attacks? What happens to American command and control coordination when an AWACS aircraft is removed from the operational picture? A researcher at the China Media Project described the situation plainly, stating that this conflict allows China to field test its guidance systems in a large-scale operational environment that directly involves the United States military, and to measure the effectiveness of those systems against American fifth-generation aircraft, while simultaneously collecting detailed performance data on America's ability to intercept missiles and drones guided by Baidu navigation. That is not an analyst speculating about possibilities. That is a description of a structured intelligence and testing program that is running in real time, with American pilots and sailors serving as the involuntary subjects of the experiment. Former French Foreign Intelligence Director Alain Juillet noted publicly that Iran's missile accuracy had improved dramatically compared to engagements just 8 months earlier, raising what he carefully described as many questions about the guidance systems involved. Those are not open questions in Beijing. Chinese military planners already have the answers. They wrote the guidance software themselves. Every sortie flown, every interception attempted, every system pushed to its limits over the Persian Gulf is feeding a database that China will use to plan, rehearse, and ultimately execute a potential military operation against Taiwan. The United States is not just fighting Iran in this conflict, it is unknowingly conducting the most detailed and expensive weapons evaluation in history on behalf of its primary strategic competitor. And it is paying for the entire program with its own depleted stockpiles, its own exhausted pilots, and its own eroding military readiness in the theater that actually matters most. While American forces remain locked in an exhausting military campaign over the Gulf, China is converting the resulting global chaos into lasting political capital, and doing it without raising its voice once. China and Pakistan jointly introduced a 5-point peace proposal at the international level, calling for an immediate halt to hostilities, protection of civilian infrastructure, guaranteed passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and full respect for United Nations resolutions. At the UN Security Council, China, alongside Russia and France, blocked any authorization of force to reopen the strait, compelling other members to significantly water down the proposed resolution. Beijing has positioned itself as the reasonable actor in the room, the measured voice calling for restraint while Washington is associated with destruction and escalation. China does not need to make that argument loudly. America's own conduct is making it. The director of the China program at the Stimson Center in Washington stated that this conflict represents an opportunity China will not allow to pass, particularly in terms of demonstrating diplomatic leadership on the global stage. A former senior American diplomat described Beijing's approach as performative, but that misses the point entirely. When half the world is watching, performance is substance. Even if China's peace proposal achieves nothing concrete, Beijing walks away having publicly championed negotiation while Washington is seen championing bombardment. That contrast is resonating deeply across the global South. The alliance fractures are now impossible to dismiss. Spain closed its airspace to American military aircraft entirely. Italy denied landing rights to US bombers at its Sigonella base in Sicily. France blocked military supply flights carrying equipment through its airspace. Poland declined to redirect its Patriot batteries to the Middle East, stating plainly that national security at home remained its absolute priority. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the United States would reassess the value of NATO. the Defense Secretary refused to make a firm commitment to Article 5 collective defense obligations. These are not diplomatic tensions, these are structural breaks. And while Washington's relationships deteriorate, European leaders are boarding flights to Beijing. The British Prime Minister secured over £4 billion in combined trade agreements during the first British ministerial visit to China in 8 years. The German Chancellor arrived with senior executives from Volkswagen and BMW, and departed with a major aircraft order. A European Parliament delegation visited Beijing for the first time in 8 years. Finland, Canada, and Australia all sent senior leadership. Trade between China and the European Union surpassed $750 billion in the previous year. The conversation about decoupling from China is functionally over. The economic consequences of the strait closure are severe and accelerating. The International Energy Agency described the disruption as the largest oil supply shock in the recorded history of global energy markets. Brent crude surged from the low 80s to over $115 per barrel, the UN trade body projected. Global merchandise trade growth collapsing from nearly 5% down to between 1 and 2%. Iran is now requiring tankers to pay in Chinese yuan for passage through the strait. Beijing was already purchasing 80% of Iran's oil exports. If yuan-denominated oil transactions become normalized through Hormuz, the structural consequences for dollar dominance in global energy markets will not be temporary. Deutsche Bank has already described this war as a potential catalyst for the erosion of the petrodollar system itself. Trump is now publicly asking Beijing to use its influence to reopen the strait, the same country he imposed historic tariffs on, the same rival he spent years trying to contain. He is asking for a favor, and China has every strategic reason to move slowly. The Trump-Xi summit, originally scheduled for late March in Beijing, was postponed due to the war. It is now confirmed for the 14th and 15th of May. Brookings Institution analysts have noted that the conflict places Washington in a significantly weakened negotiating position heading into those talks. When the two leaders finally sit across from each other, Xi Jinping will arrive carrying quiet momentum, a string of European diplomatic victories, validated military technology, and a strengthened economic hand. Donald Trump will arrive carrying an unpopular war, depleted weapons stockpiles, fractured alliances, and a domestic population growing increasingly tired of the conflict. His own internal polling, conducted by his personal pollster, warned the White House that public support for the war is eroding steadily. Time magazine reported that the administration is actively searching for a way to declare some form of victory, pause the fighting, and hope that economic conditions stabilize before the political damage becomes irreversible. That is not the language of a country that is winning. That is the language of a country hunting for the exit door. Midway through an active war, the Army Chief of Staff was forced to resign after disagreeing with civilian leadership over the prospect of a ground invasion. The USS Abraham Lincoln, America's flagship carrier in the region, was temporarily pulled from active operations due to an onboard fire. The institutions and systems that underpin American military dominance are showing visible strain under the pressure of a conflict that was never supposed to last this long or cost this much. There is a principle embedded deeply in Chinese strategic thinking that dates back centuries: conceal your capabilities, be patient, let your adversary exhaust himself. Xi Jinping is applying that principle with precision. No provocative statements, no public celebrations, no military posturing. The Peterson Institute for International Economics observed that Beijing's deliberate silence is itself a strategic message, creating space for China to expand its influence across the Indo-Pacific while America remains tangled in the Middle East. When your opponent is consistently making costly mistakes, the wisest move is simply to stay out of the way. China has spent nothing on this war and gained everything from it. It has collected real-time performance data on every major American weapons system currently in operation. It has validated Baidu navigation, its anti-stealth radar network, and its broader electronic warfare architecture against actual American forces under genuine combat conditions. It has watched European governments walk away from Washington and toward Beijing. It has advanced yuan-denominated oil trade through the world's most strategically significant waterway. And it has watched America drain the missile defense systems protecting the Indo-Pacific, the single theater where containing Chinese power actually matters in order to sustain a war in the Gulf. The question facing the international community is no longer whether China is the primary strategic beneficiary of this conflict. That conclusion is supported by the evidence from every dimension: military, diplomatic, economic, and institutional. The real question is whether the United States can disengage from this war before the accumulated damage becomes permanent, and whether the global order that emerges on the other side will still have room for American leadership at its center. Based on everything unfolding right now, that is genuinely uncertain, and in Beijing, that uncertainty is precisely the point.